Tonight, remembering a Canadian icon, award-winning actor Donald Sutherland.
I've seen you somewhere before.
A storied career that spanned genres and generations, from St. John to Hollywood, his life, legacy, and proudest achievement. Hundreds in Labrador flee as wildfire closes in.
We're driving away from everything we ever worked for.
Plus those who stayed behind at a vital power plant now under threat.
And we're in Edmonton, a city that sure is ready for Game 6. Fans have faith the Oilers will finally bring the cup back home.
Game 6 is going to be on another level, historic. And Connor McDavid, well, what can you say?
This is The National with Ian Hanomansing and Chief Correspondent Adrian Arsenault.
Thanks for joining us. We begin with the death of Donald Sutherland, the Canadian actor, and his celebrated career, the subject of so many tributes tonight. Born in New Brunswick, he became a Hollywood mainstay, spending decades in TV and film in a wide range of roles. His son, Kiefer, announced the news in a social media post, writing, "He loved what he did and did what he loved, and one can never ask for more than that, a life well lived." Lindsay Duncombe now on the world-famous actor who always remained proudly Canadian.
I'm waiting for reports from some of you.
He had such a distinct look, yet somehow Donald Sutherland would fully embody his characters.
I don't want all the debt to pile up and crush us.
It won't. We're safe.
And he brought so many of them to our screens.
I think I just gotten used to him always being that guy who would show up in a certain kind of role, and I'm not ready to say goodbye.
Sutherland was born in New Brunswick. As a teenager, he left Nova Scotia for the Toronto stage.
We were in Nova Scotia. We lived in a town of 5,000 people. Who knew what an actor was? Nobody knew. I didn't know.
London followed, then stardom, with his breakout roles in The Dirty Dozen and MASH.
They're very pretty, Colonel. Very pretty. But can they fight?
Captain, I have a dream.
I have a dream.
Sutherland depicted war on screen and used his growing celebrity to oppose it.
All of that is what made him, I think, such a magnetic figure at the beginning, where he's always anti-establishment, always defiant, super weird.
And always super Canadian, drawn to projects like this 5-hour radio play about Louis Riel.
I go away, I will go and live in Paris, or I will go and live in London, or whatever, but even in the United States, but my humor, what I am as a person, is here.
I met Donald in Rome when he came over to do a film.
Roots solidified by Sutherland's 1966 marriage to Shirley Douglas, daughter of Tommy, the man who brought socialized medicine to Canada. Their son Kiefer became a star actor too. The two eventually worked together.
Like, of all the times that I've spent with my father and my mom, we never talked about work. And I've done a film with my dad and I've done a play with my mom, and we still didn't talk about work.
Sutherland won many awards, but never an Oscar. The Academy honored him in 2017. He kept working into his 80s, playing the villain in the Hunger Games franchise.
It's an opportunity to catalyze the revolutionary potential in young people, and given the mess this world's in, that's really important.
Sutherland's legacy, a blend of art and activism rooted here at home. Lindsay Duncombe, CBC News, Vancouver.
So an honorary Oscar and the Order of Canada, but Donald Sutherland received another very special honor. Last year, Canada Post put him on a stamp. After such a prolific career, he said this was his greatest achievement. He spoke to Q host Tom Power about it back in December.
The stamp for me is everything, just everything. That puts me on letters that go everywhere. I love it. I am so touched by it.
Are you a stamp collector?
I am now. I got a lot of Donald Sutherland stamps.
Sutherland followed up after that interview, inviting the public to send him a postcard using his stamp. He sent his Quebec address for Tom to read on air, saying receiving mail would make him delighted. In Labrador, it's an anxious wait for the hundreds of people who had to suddenly run from wildfire last night. Their town, Churchill Falls, now practically a ghost town. About 700 residents had to flee their community in a bumper-to-bumper convoy, putting a wildfire behind them as it roared through heat-baked forest with alarming speed. Of the two out-of-control wildfires near Churchill Falls, the closest is just 6 kilometers from town at last count. So far, it's still south of the Churchill River, a natural barrier holding for now. Most residents are about 300 kilometers away in Happy Valley Goose Bay, hoping the fire doesn't jump that water. Peter Cowan is also in Happy Valley Goose Bay tonight with evacuees, their homes and livelihoods at stake, but also electricity for hundreds of thousands across the region.
They had just minutes to pack up and leave, hours to drive, and as quickly as they arrived in Happy Valley Goose Bay, so did the help.
Just be friendly with them and support them and feed them and just show them love.
Mattresses dragged in from a work camp, food from the Salvation Army, and strangers offering up rooms. Dogs aren't allowed at the shelter, but just as Ashley Billard was wondering what he'd do, a complete stranger walked up to him.
We came across Ingrid Crocker, who was there, basically showed up to volunteer her house. And it's been great because it really alleviated a lot of worry about what we were to do with the dog.
Tonight is the second night away from home, here with a few belongings and a lot of anxiety.
My husband said coming down, we're driving away from everything we ever worked for. And I said, yeah, but we're here, so we can always rebuild if we need to.
Today, 4 water bombers attacked the fire with more aircraft on loan from Quebec. It's just a few kilometers from Churchill Falls, but the town is protected by the Churchill River. The strong northwest winds today fueled the fire, but kept it from hopping over the river and hitting the town.
Right now there's a favorable wind pattern, but we live in Newfoundland and Labrador. Winds change all the time.
Churchill Falls is a company town. Left behind are a few dozen workers to run the hydroelectric plant. They're keeping the lights on not just in Labrador, but in Quebec and beyond.
The smoke was coming in over town.
Important work, but stressful for Beverly Bennett, her husband still close to the fire.
I'm worried. Wish he was here with us, but he has to do his job to, keep the plant running and help his co-workers. So I pray that we all make it home and be safe.
Peter, I'm just imagining if the fire just jumps the river and then those workers have to leave, it's going to be a bit of a challenge keeping electricity flowing to an entire region.
Absolutely. There are contingency plans to operate the plant remotely, but that means reducing the power output. So Newfoundland and Labrador Hydro is already talking to big customers like the mines here in Labrador and Hydro-Quebec, warning them they need to have a backup plan.
All right, Peter Cowan in Labrador, thank you. The record-setting June heat wave is set to ease in eastern Canada over the coming days, but not before it knocked down a few more temperature records. Heat warnings continue to stretch from southern Ontario well into Atlantic Canada. Charlottetown at 32 degrees, Moncton at 34 degrees, Halifax 33, all among the new temperature records set for this time in June. Now, the heat warnings in Halifax and for most of the region are set to lift as temperatures ease tomorrow and into the weekend. The cold front is also expected to bring some thunderstorms. Well, CBC News has tracked down the owner of a truck that has been driving around Toronto, covered in video that's been condemned as Islamophobic. As police investigate, here's Thomas Daigle with what we know about who's behind it.
Driving through the streets, showing pictures of Muslims praying with the message, "Wake up, Canada, you are under siege." That advertising truck prompted a Toronto police hate crime investigation and outrage from the public and from officials.
I've asked other levels of government to join me in condemning this very hateful message.
CBC News obtained Ontario Transportation Ministry records showing the vehicle's license plate is registered to Rebel News Network, the online media outlet founded by political commentator Ezra Levant. We reached him by phone.
Can I ask you if you or Rebel News has been approached by Toronto police about this?
I don't think I should answer that before checking with legal.
I've hired a lawyer, and we're obviously going to fight.
Levant posted this video saying that ad wasn't created by Rebel News, but by an anonymous group that paid to use the truck. Still,
given the history of Rebel, they probably found nothing wrong with that.
The Spirit unicorns went crazy.
Rebel News has built its reputation on firebrand commentary, recently advertising on trucks in Toronto and even Washington. And for those concerned by rising Islamophobia in Canada, this message goes too far.
There are certainly many who have said that just knowing that this has been driving around Toronto has been extremely traumatizing.
Before Levant came forward, prominent businessman Mohammed Faqih offered a reward of up to $25,000 for information leading to an arrest in what he calls a hateful campaign. Levant now calls that a bounty on his head, and he's using opposition to the truck to raise money on his website. Police wouldn't confirm whether Rebel News is now a focus of their hate crime investigation. Thomas Daigle, CBC News, Toronto.
Some relief tonight for WestJet passengers. That potential strike has now been averted. Nearly 700 aircraft mechanics were set to walk off the job Thursday night, forcing the airline to cancel dozens of flights in advance. Now the union says it's returning to the bargaining table with WestJet in hopes of reaching an agreement, and the airline is rebooking passengers affected. Well, the Stanley Cup finals return to Edmonton tomorrow night, and that is exactly where Ian is for us ahead of the big game. Lucky you.
I certainly am. This city is getting ready to host Game 6. It's another all-or-nothing game for the Oilers against the Panthers. We are here in Edmonton's downtown Ice District Plaza, right in front of Rogers Place, home of the Oilers, and where thousands of fans will be cheering them on tomorrow, inside and out. Puck drop is now just hours away when the Oilers will try to force that Game 7 and achieve what no Canadian team has done in more than 3 decades, bring home the Cup. Here's Terry Reith with the anticipation from fans and players.
A moment of worship as Oilers fans hope to harness the power of the Great One. The Stanley Cup is tantalizingly close once again.
They came back after 3 losses and they went on a 16-heater, so I think they have a chance.
I hope they really come back. It would be insane.
After being down 3 games in the final, the Oilers are now just 2 short of winning the Cup. 2 big back-to-back wins has Edmonton's downtown buzzing.
The city's on absolute fire. You just feel the buzz.
And that enthusiasm is driving the team even harder. Goalie Stuart Skinner, who's from Edmonton, is loving it.
When it comes around game time, you hear honks, you hear people getting loud and screaming, "Go Oilers!" and it's just a lot of fun. It's very enjoyable, and there's a ton of energy in the city.
It's exciting to be back in Edmonton. Excited to play in front of our fans, play in this building.
Signs of the playoffs are everywhere. Banners, flags, and a sea of orange and blue jerseys, even wearing their team pride on homes and fences. The Oilers are bringing more than 30,000 people downtown for every game, watching from the fan zone, a plaza in front of the arena, watch parties, and bars.
Every week that goes on, every game that we win, it's this, bonus round of injection of economic impact, vibrancy, community spirit.
The Oilers have one more game at home.
Game 6 is going to be on another level on a Friday night, downtown Edmonton. Historic. And Connor McDavid, well, what can you say?
Oilers fans, there's only one thing to say.
We want the Cup. We want the Cup, baby.
Terry, you covered some amazing Cup runs for the Oilers dating back to the 1980s. What's different this time around?
Well, Ian, Edmonton has always been a great hockey town, and there's always been an incredible level of enthusiasm, particularly going back to the Gretzky days. The big difference today is the building in behind us here and this fan zone. Back in the day, we played out of Northlands Coliseum, so that was a very tight, compact area up in the north end of the city, and we didn't have the concerts, we didn't have the fan experience that you have today. So what you see here with this new building, this zone, really has changed the fan experience for the better.
And you warned me it's going to be loud tomorrow. Thank you, Terry.
You're welcome.
For every game this postseason, Oiler fans have gathered in the Ice District, even when the team was playing on the road. The roots of this club are more than 40 years deep, but this playoff run is revitalizing the fan base and the city. 34 years after the team's last Stanley Cup, the Oilers say this playoff run is creating a new generation of fans. What do you think the legacy will be, first of all, for the Oilers organization?
Well, I think it's a new era. You know, you've gone through the Gretzky, Messier, Anderson era, and now this is the Connor McDavid, the Leon Draisaitl, the Zach Hyman.
You can't help but smile when you say those
I
names.
know. It's amazing that we're resetting what happened in the past. Like, for these guys to be breaking records and leading the league in their points and goals, all these kind of things, is just giving the Oiler fan another reason to have sort of another generation of people with success.
And what about the legacy for Edmonton, the city?
Well, Edmonton's on the map. People in Florida know where Edmonton is all of a sudden. We're the northernmost city in the NHL. We're probably the 25th largest market in the NHL, yet we're still competing at a very, very high level in all aspects, business and on ice, and that's a great legacy for us to have.
And that legacy has reach. Alex Tung has traveled here from California. So you've come up from San Francisco for Friday's game.
Correct.
Why?
I'm an Oilers fan. Since I was like 10 years old.
Are you originally from
No,
Edmonton?
I'm originally from the Toronto area,
Yeah.
Brampton, Ontario.
Okay.
And my dad lived out in Edmonton when I was a kid. And he kind of made me into an Oilers fan, a Gretzky fan, and I followed them ever since.
And this group has made the trek from Sweden. How's this for faith in the Oilers?
Yeah, we planned the trip like a year ago, hoping that they somehow would make the finals. And
you planned a trip to come to Edmonton
Yeah.
a year ago.
So we watched every game like in the middle of the nights, and now we made it here.
So what is it about the Oilers that makes a guy in Sweden such a big fan?
It's hockey, best hockey team, best fans, best team. So.
A sign of that devotion will be outside the rink tomorrow when thousands of fans will be cheering them on here.
What really has kind of warmed my heart is you look at the crowd. The demographics of the Oilers fan has changed. You got people young, people old, all different backgrounds coming together to cheer on the team. So having lived here a long time, knowing how much the Oilers mean to the region, the fact that we're hosting Game 6 of the Stanley Cup Final on June 21st, it means a lot.
So Adrian, we know the Oilers first need to win tomorrow, and we'll be here on the National watching it all unfold.
You bet. We'll see you then, Ian. From hockey to soccer, Canada made its debut at the Copa America tonight. They faced the defending champions, Argentina, but lost 2-0. Canada plays next Tuesday against Peru. Well, Justin Trudeau is facing a major test in a Toronto by-election.
Oh, I know she's a great candidate. She's the best of the bunch. Yeah. Justin Trudeau.
We're in the riding where Liberals are campaigning to hold on to a long-held seat. The injuries are mounting among Ukrainian soldiers with little experience.
How difficult was it for you to leave the trench?
Very difficult.
We go to the front lines of the war and...
May the odds be ever in your favor.
Donald Sutherland's love of acting in his own words.
And you take it home and you can taste it.
We're back in 2. American rapper Travis Scott has been arrested after being involved in a disturbance on a yacht in a Miami marina. Scott was charged with trespassing on property and disorderly intoxication. He's since been released on bond. Well, next to the war in Ukraine, where soldiers without combat experience are being put on the front lines. CBC News gained special access to a team evacuating wounded fighters, some conscripted only weeks ago. Briar Stewart brings us their stories and stories you won't see anywhere else.
At a secret pickup point in Ukraine's Dnipro region, a medical evacuation for soldiers who were injured just hours ago. Some can walk. Others are on stretchers, like this 39-year-old. His call sign is Wi-Fi. Before he was conscripted 2 months ago, he worked in IT.
How long had you been on the front line for?
2,5 доби. He smiles and says 2.5 days. Shrapnel tore through his legs.
How difficult was it for you to leave the trench?
Very difficult.
He said once the tourniquets were on, his legs wouldn't move. He had to be carried. This former accountant was on the front line a little longer, about a month. His tank was hit earlier in the day, trapping him inside. All of these men are being taken to the hospital by a team of volunteer medics with the group Hospitalers.
They never quite know when they're going to run these evacuation buses. It depends how many injured soldiers there are, and sometimes there's not even enough space to get them all on board.
Among the group, this soldier stands out. He's 60 and tells us his vehicle was hit by a drone.
Drone.
He volunteered at the start of the invasion. There are all these excuses that younger men are ill, he said, adding that he has medical problems and he's still serving. Ukraine is trying to recruit more soldiers because after nearly 2.5 years of war, there are mounting casualties. They always ask if their limbs will be amputated, says volunteer Tatiana Romaniuk. They worry what they will do next. Once the bus is full, it departs for the hospital. An hour and a half later, when they arrive, a soldier is headed into emergency surgery because there's shrapnel in his spine. For others, the injuries are not as visible. It's very difficult, both mentally and physically, says Wi-Fi. It's hard for an ordinary soldier, let alone for someone who only had basic training. But like the others, his time on the front might not be over. After they've healed, a medical commission will determine if they're still fit for duty. Briar Stewart, CBC News in the Dnipro region.
The federal Liberals are in a fight to hold on to a Toronto riding they've held for decades.
I had a hard time making a selection this year. I'll just put it that way.
The by-election that could send a strong signal to the Liberals. And Rosie will look beyond the by-election to a busy summer circuit on At Issue tonight. Hey, Rosie.
Hey, that's right, Adrian. The House of Commons has adjourned for the summer, but the party's slogans will continue.
Who here is ready to axe the taxes? Who's ready to build the homes?
What will it take to win over Canadians? Chantal, Althea, and Andrew join me to talk about that and a whole lot more.
Voters will cast their ballots Monday in what is shaping up to be a high-stakes federal by-election in Toronto. As JP Tasker tells us, it's going to be a major test for the Trudeau Liberals. Can they hold on to a riding they've held for decades?
On a busy morning, it's hard to break through the noise.
Good morning, good morning.
Especially to talk politics.
Hi, folks. I'm Leslie Church. I'm your local Liberal candidate.
Toronto St. Paul's has been a safe seat for the Liberals for more than 30 years, and Leslie Church is Justin Trudeau's candidate this time around. She's favored to win this by-election, but it's his name that's on voters' minds.
I'm just one of those Liberals who can't support Trudeau this time out.
Oh, check Leslie out. Great candidate.
Oh, I know she's a great candidate. She's the best of the bunch. Yeah. Justin Trudeau.
It's a sentiment Church can't ignore.
Well, look, I do hear a lot of that too, and I think that that's pretty natural for this point in time.
She's pitching Liberal policies on housing and daycare, but she knows the rising cost of living is driving some people away from her party.
They're frustrated, they're cranky, but I also think that they are smart and thoughtful, and that when they look at the alternatives here, they want to vote for people who are actually going to bring real solutions to the table.
Think you can win this thing? The solution for many of the voters we spoke to, shifting support to Conservative candidate Don Stewart.
Look, we've had a super busy morning, knocking on doors, talking to voters at doors.
Talking to voters, but not journalists.
What are voters telling you? Thank you.
What are they telling you?
Yeah.
Even Liberal voters at the advanced polls say this by-election should be a wake-up call for the party and its leader.
This riding is important enough as an indicator that he should really seriously contemplate passing the baton at this point while there's still time for a new leader to gain some traction.
Polls suggest the race could be tight.
A lot of the Jewish community usually votes Liberal NDP, and a lot of things have changed.
A lot of time has gone by now,
And it's just time for a change.
I had a hard time making a selection this year. I'll just put it that way.
It all comes down to Election Day on June 24th. A poor showing here by the Liberals in St. Paul's could lead to some soul-searching for the party and for Justin Trudeau. JP Tasker, CBC News, Toronto.
And on Monday night, CBC News will have special streaming coverage of the by-election. You can join David Cochrane live when the polls close, starting at 8:30 p.m. Eastern. You can stream it on the CBC News app, cbcnews.ca, and on GEM. And you can bet At Issue is also ready to talk about that by-election and much more. Rosie's here now to break down the week in politics.
At issue this week, the House of Commons has risen and MPs are getting ready for a summer of campaigning. The Liberals will be trying to close the significant gap with the Conservatives, a gap the Prime Minister is already downplaying.
Canadians are not in a decision mode right now. What you tell a pollster if they ever manage to reach you is very different from the choice Canadians end up making in an election campaign.
So what will Liberals be focused on this summer? How important is that Toronto by-election on Monday for the campaign ahead? Hello, I'm Rosemary Barton, and this is At Issue. Let's bring in everybody. Chantal Hébert, Andrew Coyne, Althea Raj. I just want to start with that clip that the Prime Minister gave to my colleague David Cochrane about how Canadians aren't in decision mode right now. Althea, what did you make of that comment and what it says about where his thinking is at?
That he's not really listening. I mean, they may not are, most Canadians, except for the residents, obviously, of Toronto, St. Paul's, are not marking their ballot anytime soon. But for more than a year now, pollsters have reported that 80% of the country wants change. And, a significant chunk aren't really sure who to vote for. But they seem to suggest that they're looking for a party that's not the Liberal Party. And if he's still thinking that people are not, facing a decision, he's probably not preparing well. The thing that struck me from that interview with David Cochrane was when your colleague asked, what is it that's left to accomplish on a fourth term? And frankly, the Prime Minister had no answer. Oh, it's continuing to meet the moment for Canadians? What does that mean? That is not a message that Liberals can go to the doors with over the summer. And frankly, the problem with a lot of caucus at the moment is they seem completely resigned to be swallowed up by a blue wave. There is no hunger, and there is no message coming from the center telling them what they should be saying at the doors. So except for a few, there are a few who are hungry, there is complete resignation on the part of most Liberal MPs.
Okay, so Chantal, what given that, what should we be watching for beyond Monday? Obviously, Monday is important, but what else?
Well, Monday is important, and in a French interview, the Prime Minister seemed to be suggesting that a win on Monday in Toronto, St. Paul's would set a pattern for maybe what is to come. That really doesn't work in the sense that Toronto St. Paul's is a Liberal riding, has been, it should be a safe Liberal riding. Yes. Mm-hmm. But it's not the typical riding that elections are won or lost in. What I'm going to be watching for, picking up on what Althea just said about resignation and, going to the slaughterhouse together, is how many MPs use the summer, and one apparently has just done so in Toronto, to say, I'm not reoffering. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to be a candidate in the next election. I think the Liberals are waiting for events to turn their way rather than trying again, and they failed all spring to take control of the narrative. Those two events they're looking for is an improvement in the economy, may or may not happen in a way that changes voters' minds, and what happens to the U.S.-American election in the fall.
It's the Liberal MP John McKay just announced today he's not reoffering, but I thought it was partly because of redistribution, because the map is going to change and a lot of people don't like their chances. But sure, it's also because if you see that things are going to be harder, maybe you don't want to do it. Andrew, what are you going to keep an eye on here?
Well, look, there can be some truth in what the Prime Minister said. There are occasions when you look at the polls and you say people aren't really focused. I think to reinforce or take a slightly different thing from Althea's point, if there's anything that's more baked in than the party standings, it's what people think of the Prime Minister. And this is often the way that people make up their mind about the leader first, and then that bleeds through into the the party standings. And before the big divergence between the Conservatives and the Liberals that happened last summer, you were already seeing very bad numbers for the Prime Minister, and they've only gotten worse since then. So that's one impediment for them in trying to make a comeback. The second that was also mentioned was, what's the reason? What's the proposition you're putting before the public? What would you do with that next term? And there, I think they run into the difficulty that they've got to figure out what is the direction. Do we try to round up the left in the usual Liberal strategy, go hard on NDP issues, tell people how scary the Conservatives are, try to get the NDP voters back in their tent? The problem with that, I mean, they've used it before, but they've really run that play this time, and where are they at? They're at 22% in the polls.
Yeah.
So there's a lot more room to their right, to the center, that they so far have not exploited. It would be a long shot that they could pull those voters back in, but to the extent that there's still doubts about Pierre Poilievre in particular, those voters, I would suspect, are more reachable than the voters to their left. But it may require, as a last point, it may require that you change leaders, that it may be that people have just so tuned him out now that they're not going to be able to reach those voters.
And we're going to talk about Pierre Poilievre in the next block, just so people know he's getting his own time. Chantal, you wanted in there?
I agree with Andrew that to make a move towards the right, you probably need a leadership change. I don't believe that Justin Trudeau can reach out to that constituency over the summer. But I also don't think that it's going to happen over the summer. Why? Because Canadians are sane, and they know that the summer is short, and they're not going to be sitting asking themselves, on this, Justin Trudeau is right, they're not going to be sitting asking themselves, how am I going to vote in maybe a year or a year and a half? But and that's why that Monday by-election is so important, because I don't believe that if the Liberals win it, it means that the Liberals can win another election. But I do believe that if they lose it, it means that they don't have a shot under this leader.
It's interesting, Althea. Yeah, it's interesting, Althea, because I have had Liberal MPs say to me they have the impression that Canadians are tired of seeing Justin Trudeau, but that some of the policies that are in the window are still attractive to Canadians. So there's like a coherence problem for them in terms of what they're trying to sell.
And maybe if you replace the leader, the thinking goes, according to some of them, that that would give him a better shot. Andrew mentioned the Liberals are at 22%. That's just 3% higher than what Michael Ignatieff got in 2011. Like, that is really, really bad. And if they lose on Monday, there will be finally a movement within caucus to actually make the case to Mr. Trudeau that he should go for the good of the country and the party. There isn't that
Not
feeling at the moment. Well, I mean, this is what some people are saying, because frankly, they will all say it to you privately. I'm sure, Rosie, they tell you privately, but they're not saying it in caucus because they're afraid that if they put their neck out, they're headed towards the guillotine. So they are not saying what I think needs to be said to the Prime Minister about the feelings in the writing. You know, for all this talk he had in 2015 about you are your writing's voice in Ottawa, well, he's not asking them what the writing is saying in Ottawa. And they seem completely out of touch. Like, the Liberal caucus has decided to meet, they will meet in September, in Nanaimo. The Liberals have never won Nanaimo. What is the message about going to Nanaimo? It makes no sense. Like, this is the strategic. It's a nice place to go. It's a beautiful place, but it is far. It is expensive. It is a seat they will never win. This is a seat that has gone, Conservative NDP. All these Liberal MPs going to Nanaimo will open themselves up to criticism that they're wasting all this greenhouse gas emissions to get there. It makes no strategic sense why they're meeting in Nanaimo. This is just one example of so many little things that has a lot of people in caucus scratching their heads.
Okay, quickly, Chantal, then I got to take a break.
It is maybe the last chance for so many of them to get to Nanaimo in nice weather. On the eve of a provincial election in BC where there is no Liberal name on the ballot.
Yeah.
Even more interesting.
Yeah. 10 seconds, Andrew.
I'd just say he needs to make up his mind soon. If you're going to go, best to go now to give the party time to choose another leader. There's an argument for staying, but the argument for staying is better to lose under the old leader than taint the new leader.
I think he's made up his mind, for the record. It's whether other people can convince him to change his mind. But okay, that was good. We'll leave this part there. When we come back, we'll take a look at how the Conservatives are preparing for months ahead.
But who here is ready to axe the taxes? Who's ready to build the homes?
Conservative leader, look, he's got an RV and he's heading to ridings in Quebec that he thinks he can steal away. How does the party plan to capitalize on their lead over the summer? That's next. At issue, the Conservative summer. The Tories are dominating the polls, so much so that Pierre Poilievre is going on the offensive in ridings the party thinks they can win over, including just last night in Montreal.
Justin Trudeau, with the help of his Liberal servants like Anthony Housefather, have tripled the rent.
So what are the plans for the Conservatives this summer? How can they capitalize on their lead in the polls? Let's bring everybody back. Chantal, Andrew, and Althea. Chantal, I'll start with you because this is a very specific sort of week-long concentration that Poilievre is doing in Quebec, and some of the ridings he's going to, I think, kind of telling because they're places where it's possible they could win. What do you make of his strategy for that province?
I'm as fascinated by the places he doesn't go to as the places he's going to. So Mount Royal, where he was last night, is a riding that Stephen Harper used to dream about. They kept back in the Harper days saying, we're going to win a riding on the island of Montreal. It's going to be Mount Royal. Why Mount Royal? Because it is the riding with the highest proportion of people who are from the Jewish community on the island of Montreal, and they believe, again, that they have an opening there because of the Palestine-Israel conflict and the fact that the Conservatives are more aligned with Israel on the issue. What I found interesting is that there will be a vote on the island of Montreal in a by-election just next door in La Salle-et-Mort, where David Lametti left the place vacant back in January. So there will be a vote in a riding on Montreal Island in September, probably. But that is not where Mr. Poilievre is going. The other interesting part is if you look beyond that riding, the one last night and the one in Trois-Rivières, he's mostly going to seats that the Conservatives already have. And what fascinated me is he's not spending the weekend in Toronto, St. Paul's, where there's actually a vote on Monday.
Yeah. I wonder, though, the fact that he's spending time in Quebec, I mean, I know obviously that's important to any party, but for the Conservatives has been challenging. And I wonder whether that gives us a sense of how confident he is about how he's doing in other places too, Andrew, that he can go and spend some concentrated time there.
Yeah, a lot of times it's not necessarily about Quebec, it's about other places. So one of the things you do to win in Ontario is show that you're credible in Quebec, that you can at least win a few seats in Quebec. And then once Quebecers see you doing well in Ontario, then maybe they'll give you another look. So there's always this kind of two-step. I suspect Chantal may be right that part of this is not going to Toronto, St. Paul's. But look, the main thing he's got to accomplish is look more like a prime minister and less like an attack dog. We know he can do the attack lines. We know he can rile up his faithful on that. They love him for that. But if he wants to really lock this down, he's got to get the people who are sort of with the Conservatives, but mostly against the Liberals. And so I think some of that time this summer would be well spent looking a little more likable, a little bit more prime ministerial. He's done quite well in the last couple of weeks. He's had a couple of good moments on things that might have been quite challenging. One was the Arnold Viersen, the MP, who said all those very, very socially conservative things to the Liberal on the Liberal podcast. Poilievre's statement on that was more than perfunctory. It was pretty firmly distancing himself from the social conservatives just in general. It was a pretty broad-ranging statement. And then secondly, on the capital gains tax, where he, I think, reassured perhaps some economic conservatives that he's not just going to be completely, populist all the way down, chasing every NDP vote he can find. That's good. He's starting to define himself a bit more as something other than just a pure political animal, as somebody who's got some substance to him, and I think he needs to do more of that.
Yeah, it's not a mistake that his wife is with him, Althea, on this RV trip, and his two children are in the RV playing and stuff. So, I think that they understand what Andrew's saying as well. What are you going to watch for from him?
Yeah, well, his wife is also a Quebecer, right? So she has been introducing him at convention, for example. She led the introduction for him. So I think Quebec is really interesting. It's only place in the country at the moment where the Conservatives are third. So the Liberals are behind the Bloc Québécois. The Bloc Québécois is ahead. But they're basically nipping at the heels of the Liberals. And last summer, we saw the Conservative make inroads in Atlantic Canada. And they basically made up a 20% deficit. And then it became like they were ahead of the Liberals by 20 points. And the more Quebecers realize that actually Pierre Poilievre's French is quite good, and the more that they start turning to him and think like, okay, well, maybe if he's like going to be prime minister, we should have more MPs in his caucus. There should be more Quebec cabinet ministers. The greater this is obviously for the Liberals. The Liberals, this is the only firm place they have at the moment where they can kind of mount a comeback. So if they're destroyed in Quebec, there really is, you know, where will the anybody but Pierre Poilievre vote go? It won't be clear. It won't be clear that it all rests with the NDP or it all rests with the Liberals. And that further kind of diffuses the center progressive vote across those parties. So I think it's strategically really important. The other thing to mention is, frankly, the Conservatives have so much money. They can afford
They can do this.
to go to ridings that they have no shot of winning. Like in the last 5 quarters, so 2023 in the last 3 months of first 3 months of this year, the Conservatives raised $46 million. That is $12 million more than they are legally allowed to spend in the next election. The Liberals, in comparison, raised $18 million, the NDP $8 million. They are swimming in cash. They can afford to do this.
Yeah, and you can spend as much as you want outside of the RIP period, Chantal.
But if you do bring it back to Quebec, the problem is, one, the anti-Trudeau feeling is never as high here as it is in the rest of the country. Actually, a poll today suggested that there were more people who believed that François Legault, the Premier, is doing a poor job than people who believe Justin Trudeau is doing a poor job. So that kind of tells you something. I can understand why Mr. Trudeau would want to spend more time in Quebec over the summer. Also, a strong, up to a point, Conservative Party against a relatively strong Bloc Québécois is good for the Liberals in Quebec. They can use those three-way races to slip in between. It's not a bad thing for them. I also, Yves-François Blanchet pointed it out in a French interview, Mr. Poilievre is here this week, but Yves-François Blanchet, who only campaigns in Quebec, is going to be all over Quebec all summer. So I understand why Mr. Poilievre is campaigning and starting off in Quebec, but I do not believe that his victory or his majority will run through here.
No.
He doesn't even need any seats in Quebec. Like, if you look at the polls, he could win a majority government with 0 seats in Quebec.
Well, then that creates a whole other can of worms that would get us talking for weeks. Last word to you, Andrew.
Well, I'll just add that if the PQ continues to do well in Quebec, that may scare a few Federalist voters in Quebec back into the Liberal camp.
Yeah, and that's the can of worms, the exact can of worms I was talking about. Thank you all very much, and I'm going to wish you, I'm going to jinx this, but I'm going to wish you a good summer break from each other and from being here. Thank you for your expertise all season long. At Issue, we'll be taking a quick summer break, a hiatus if you will, but we'll be back if or when news warrants, and if I can get these guys to come back. And with that, I'll send things back to Adrienne, and she's in Toronto.
Thank you, Rosie. Next, we reflect on a legend's acclaimed career.
I've had a wonderful time. The best life in the world an actor could have.
Donald Sutherland's love of the craft in his own words. Tributes are pouring in today for Donald Sutherland, an iconic actor, obviously deeply committed to his work for half a century. Over the years, he wasn't shy to offer advice or wisdom about his profession or the craft. As we close tonight, the prolific actor in his own words.
I was born in New Brunswick, in St. John. I'm a blue noser, I guess. I'm just a, an okay actor.
Then why the hell aren't you up there helping them?
Oh, man. I only ride him. I don't know what makes him work. The first play I ever did was here in Toronto. I came here because I told my dad I wanted to be an actor. I knew that it was what I wanted to be. I don't know your name, stranger, but your face is familiar. If you are skilled, you can be a poet. You can do something very valuable. You really do love him, don't you? In their lives, it's like a love affair. It's extraordinary. It's really beautiful. It's thrilling. And you take it home and you can taste it.
May the odds be ever in your favor.
There's making films is terrific.
Why don't you knock it off with them negative waves?
You start out in this life and you have a modicum of talent, you have a certain amount of luck, you have discipline and hard work, but the essential thing is to have a wonderful partner. And then if you have that, you have a chance of having a life that's worthwhile.
Hope. It is the only thing stronger than fear.
He has just always been there. Donald Sutherland is one of these people I think you disconnect in the notion of mortality. You just presume he always will be there. And I suppose thanks to his work, in a way, he still will be. From all of us at The National, thank you for being with us. You can watch anywhere, anytime on the free CBC News app and subscribe to The National's YouTube channel. I'm Adrienne Arsenault. Take care.